We have new information in a mystery in Montauk that is still unsolved months later. A bombshell report is giving us a glimpse into the final moments of swimsuit designer Martha Nolan-O'Slatarra's life. She was found dead at a Ritzy Yacht Club in the Hamptons with an older man who was reportedly found running around the docks naked, crying for help. And now we're reading text messages that Nolan reportedly sent in the hours before her death, what they tell us about her final moments as her family continues to search for answers in an investigation where law enforcement is keeping a lot of details close to the vest. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Stewart. All right, real quick before we get to the new information in this story, I need to talk about our partner and sponsor, Morgan & Morgan, America's largest personal injury law firm. It's a firm with more than 1,000 attorneys, and they've recovered more than $25 billion from more than 500,000 clients. And in the past few months, a client in Florida received $12 million when insurance offered just $350,000. In Pennsylvania, another client was awarded $26 million, 40 times the insurer's offer. Morgan & Morgan makes it easy to fight for what you deserve. You can even start a claim from your phone. So if you're injured, you can start a claim at forthepeople.com/OTC. Click the link below or scan the QR code on your screen. Well, it's been more than 3 months since police on Long Island were called to a Ritzy Yacht Club because a young woman had died. And we still don't know what happened to Martha Nolan-O'Slatarra. Now, O'Slatarra went by Martha Nolan publicly. She was 33 years old. She had moved to New York from her native Ireland back in 2015. Now, Nolan really had made a name for herself in New York. She was a rising star in the fashion scene. She lived what appears to be a high-flying lifestyle of luxury, but as an entrepreneur, she worked for it. Now, back on August 4th, Nolan went out on a boat cruise with a 60-year-old man who had invested a lot of money in her swimwear business. There's this new article that just dropped in New York Magazine, and wow, there are a lot of new details that we need to go over that talk about the final hours and final moments leading up to Nolan's death on the docks of the Montauk Yacht Club. Now, the article brings up some interesting details and text messages that friends had reportedly sent Nolan in the hours leading up to her death. The magazine also spoke with the man's attorney and gave an interesting answer to questions as to why this 60-year-old man, who was supposedly her business partner, was naked on the docks after she died, as he was reportedly trying to get help for Nolan, who had gone unconscious on his boat. Now, let's break down what led up to that night and this mystery.
Hi guys, this is Martha from East by East. I am the founder, the creative director.
Nolan was the founder of a swimwear brand. It was called East by East, and she reportedly started it back in 2022. New York Magazine reports that she wanted to make it a global brand, though, so much more than just a little startup. But as all big businesses do, you have to start at the bottom and work your way up. She did a lot of pop-up shops in the Hamptons, and she was really working her way into the wealthy crowds that often go to the Hamptons in the summertime. New York Magazine reports that to help give Martha Nolan's business a boost, she sold 13% of it to a wealthy man named Christopher Durnan. He's 60 years old, and he himself is a widower. According to the magazine, his wife reportedly took her own life back in 2018. Now, Durnan made his fortune after selling an insurance company. And the magazine writes he had become a fixture of the Hamptons in the summer, loved to have a good time. He owned multiple boats that were docked at the yacht club where Martha Nolan died. Now, Durnan reportedly invested $250,000 in East by East, which is a good amount of money, but this brand apparently still needed more. And the night that Nolan died, she and Durnan allegedly went out for a cruise on his boat. New York Magazine reports that Durnan and Nolan, they had sipped champagne, they watched the sunset before they returned to the yacht club. And this was supposed to be a business meeting where they were talking about the future of the business and whether Martha would need more money for it. The magazine has text messages that show what Martha's friends were thinking on the night of this business meeting. They had sent messages because they hadn't heard from Nolan for some time. One text says, quote, LMAO, I'm sure her phone died, or maybe she's dead. obviously just a joke at 9:20 in the evening, but it was roughly an hour after that where Nolan did actually die, according to police. Now, Nolan responded to that text though at 9:30, just about 10 minutes later, saying, quote, "LOL, I'm at the yacht club now, my phone is on." Now, these are the final moments of Martha Nolan's life, and what's still being investigated by police is exactly how she died. Durnan's lawyer told New York Magazine that Nolan and his client were on Durnan's boat. It was called Ripple. Now, he says the two were there. They were talking business on the docks after they had done this reported sunset cruise. The lawyer says it was around 10:30 or 11 that Martha Nolan, this 33-year-old, went limp. The lawyer says that Durnan described it like she had a heart attack.
Female unconscious, not breathing at the Montauk Yacht Club. 32 Star Island Road.
Police say the 911 call came in around midnight, which New York Magazine says does leave an hour unaccounted for compared to Durnan's lawyer's timeline of events. We'll get more into that in just a moment. Durnan's lawyer did say that his client, though, tried to save Nolan by giving her CPR. But this is where we get to another really odd part of this story, one that is definitely raising a lot of questions. Witnesses say that Durnan, this 60-year-old man, who was Martha Nolan's business partner, was on the docks naked. The New York Post spoke to witnesses who say they saw Durnan running on the docks naked, throwing sunscreen at people's boats, trying to wake them up to get help. He was yelling, quote, "Do something." Now, of course, the big question is, why would this man be naked on a Monday night on the docks after having what was supposed to be a business meeting with this 33-year-old girl? Well, Durnan's lawyer told New York Magazine that his client had to take his clothes off because he was soaked in Nolan's vomit. He also says that his client doesn't know how long he did CPR for on Nolan, and that can be an explanation for that gap in time between when Nolan may have gone unconscious and died and when police were called around midnight. Now, Nolan was in a relationship with a man, and a man who was much closer to her in age. He actually helped carry her casket out of the church at her funeral in Ireland. But this brings up another odd part to this story, because according to New York Magazine, shortly after her death, Durnan's attorney said, quote, "They actually dated. He had told me after it happened that he loved her and that he had met her family." He claims that Durnan visited her family in Ireland, that Durnan, the 60-year-old man, and Nolan, the 33-year-old woman, that they actually had been romantic at some point. Now, I want to tell you that Nolan's family says that is not true, according to New York Magazine, that they had never met Durnan in Ireland. And Durnan's lawyer did walk back some of those comments saying, quote, he goes, "We weren't boyfriend and girlfriend." And the attorney says that he wouldn't answer questions about whether Durnan and Nolan were physically intimate or romantic, saying that it would not be fair to her memory. But to this point, police have not released much information other than saying that this case is under investigation. The initial autopsy came back inconclusive, and we have yet to learn the results of a toxicology test and a full autopsy. Now, fueling even more speculation is white powder that was seen on Durnan's boat after police had cleared the scene. Now, this image fueled speculation that Nolan's death was an overdose and that they were doing illegal drugs on board this boat. Durnan's lawyer told the New York Magazine that what you're actually looking at when you see that substance, it's not an illegal substance, it's not drugs, it's not something like cocaine, but it's actually dust that was left behind by police that they used when they were looking for prints on board the boat. Now, Durnan's lawyer said that his client told detectives that Nolan excused herself twice that night when they were together, and the lawyer said that that could suggest that either Nolan had to go to the bathroom or could it be a sign of someone who was doing drugs. Now, Nolan's family has a lawyer, and he has pushed back on any sort of speculation that her death is related to drugs. He told the New York Post that Nolan was not known to do drugs. A final autopsy and toxicology tests, though, those are very important because those could prove Nolan's cause of death. Again, Durnan has not been charged with any crime in connection to this case, and his lawyer told New York Magazine that he has been cooperating with the investigation, and it's important to note that he is devastated over the loss of someone who he loved and someone he considered a friend. Joining me now is retired NYPD Detective David Sarney. Thank you for being with us here on Law and Crime. This New York Magazine article, it does shed a lot of light just in terms of maybe not as far as the investigation, how it's going, but what Martha Nolan's life was like, this man who she was allegedly with the night that she died. From an investigative standpoint, what did you learn when you read that article?
Well, thanks for having me. But, when I see the article, you're seeing the backstory, the victimology in a sense, the backstory of everybody involved. You're unfortunately, you're deceased. You have the victim here and the person that she was associated with. And it seems to be, this is where you have conflicts of relationships. One time, you're hearing one side of the story, which is him and the attorney saying they had some sort of relationship of an intimacy. Then the family says it wasn't. She had a boyfriend at the time before her death or during this whole incident. So you're going to hear a lot of different stories. And what the investigators do now is you take all of that information and then you try to get to the truth. What are the true factors of this? And we could look at it as the cost benefit analysis. What is the benefit for him to have a relationship with her and her to have with him? And it seemed to be a business relationship because she was starting out with her friends, getting her business started in different ways. And then they finally catch on to something and have a benefactor. And this benefactor, good, bad, or indifferent, had some sort of investment in that business. And whatever they were going to do that night, apparently there's going to be a business discussion on either getting more money into the business, but her business partner wasn't available, so she went to meet up with him. And it hasn't seemed anything nefarious at that point. So it's just they're meeting up to talk about things, and they seem to have had a very cordial relationship because you wouldn't meet somebody outside later at night on a boat.
No, and there's odd details that come out, and we can dive into all of that. But I feel like there's that part of it where you're like, the tabloidy part of this, which is why this story has received so much attention. But then there's also just the question of, are we talking about something here where someone is going to be facing criminal charges? The way that the lawyer describes Martha Nolan's last moments, in the way that his client had described it, where it was like she had a heart attack. It says she went limp, she was throwing up. Does that sound consistent with someone who overdosed on some sort of illegal substance?
Well, that's the thing also you have to really look at. You're getting the story, and apparently the reason why he was outside naked is he took off the clothes because she threw up all over them. She went down. He was trying to resuscitate her, then he could not do it, so he ran around. He took off his clothes, which is kind of unusual that he wouldn't call 911 or anything like that. He went out. But you can't know a person how they panic, so you can't always say, well, that makes him guilty of something. The reality is, what is the crime right now? And if you look at the elements of a crime, right now you don't have enough to prosecute. Did she ingest something that might have gotten her sick and had her throw up? That's a possibility. So could it have been a substance that she thought was X and turned out to be Y, and that's what happened? Or was there and this is where you have to look at the criminality. Did she voluntarily ingest this substance, or was it given to her, or did she purchase it from someone? And this is all speculation. Or was this purchased from an individual that she regularly deals with? And this could have been what's called a bad batch in a sense. So there's a lot of things. There's a lot of avenues to go. You may not be able to get criminality to the boat owner at this point, but is there criminality dealing with the narcotics or the suspected narcotics? Because we don't have a tox back. And that toxicology back doesn't tell you anything. So we don't know what we're looking for. You may be looking for packaging. So I'll tell you, when they went to that boat, you're going to be having, if you see this, and I was a narcotics investigator for a while, and you're already thinking that this could be an ingestion of some sort. You're looking for packaging of the substance. Was there packaging? Was it a pill? What was the way she ingested it? And that's where hopefully the interview had with the surviving member of this involvement of this event could give you a little bit more. And apparently he's been very cooperative at this point. So we don't know if it was a party moment where they both ingested it, or it was a moment where she just ingested it and she had a bad reaction. So this is all coming out. And that's why, I like Suffolk County because the way they handle things, they keep things very quiet. But narcotics investigators will also be involved in this, because anytime we deal with possible of drugs and illegal substances, we want to make sure what they are. And now what the benefit in New York State is, we actually go after the dealers of these products. So it's not, if someone overdoses, we actually can now start to actually prosecute and investigate the dealers.
Yeah, so if this comes back, and it was, I think, sadly, fentanyl is just such a problem across the country, and it gets into batches, and then people lose their lives over it. And we don't know if that's the case. Again, the family's pushing back on her being someone who would use drugs We don't know. But if it does come back and it's an overdose, what type of trouble could the 60-year-old man she was with be in? Like, how do you prosecute that?
That's the thing. Now, the question belies is, you kind of like the John Belushi situation. Remember way back then about ingesting it and shooting up. Then she got caught in part and parcel responsible for his death. Did he bring the product to her? Did she ingest it with him? Did she ingest it by herself? Did she mistakenly ingest it? These are things that had to come out in the conversation, the interviews with the detectives and him. And this is where you have to look at the criminality. What's the crime that he committed? Did he kind of the infamous slipping a Mickey, put it in and she didn't know about it? That's why she got sick. Did that come out in the play? Was the product that they have higher quality, or was with fentanyl in it, so any type of illegal substance? There's a lot of things we look at, but to charge a crime right now to anybody right now, you can't. And then the court of public opinion is very angry about this. He should be responsible for something. But the couple mental states here are knowingly, recklessly, negligently, and intentionally. We don't see that right now on his part. So the prosecutors are already looking at this, and they've already determined, we don't have enough. The medical examiner, when we have these deaths, they're calling it undetermined. And in New York City, we call circumstances unknown, pending police investigation. So they're still investigating this case to determine what happened. And if there's not enough criminality to go with the prosecutor, we can give it to the district attorney's office, and they can decide whether to prosecute or not, or actually charge whatever charge they can. But right now, they're still doing what they have to do, and you have to make sure if everything is done properly.
What type of charges could someone bring or face if someone brings an illegal substance to a gathering? They didn't know it had fentanyl in it. Certainly, it's an illegal substance. But if someone consumes a substance that you bring to a function or a meeting or whatever it may be, and someone dies, what type of trouble, what type of charge can you face for that?
Well, that's the question is, you have to go by the intent. As far as police are concerned, the intent isn't as necessary as it would be for the prosecution. So we could say, criminal possession of controlled substance, it's a misdemeanor. The forced ingestion would be something else if there's a force to it. But right now, there's little to say that he was involved particularly in this. Would someone be charged in the death of her? And we've seen drug dealers, as we've run up the chain, we've seen this with several cases, especially in New York now, they're really pursuing this, which years ago when I was in narcotics, it was sort of like the buck stopped where the overdose took place. But now we can actually continue further. So if there is unusual packaging that's been recovered, which we don't know about, or we find out the type of narcotic, or we scour the social media, scour the phone records of both her and him, and to see if there were any contact with anybody or persistent contact that they would deal with, any text messages. Then we can go up the chain on that end, and then maybe prosecute the person who sold the drugs to them. Again, this is all speculation because we were still awaiting the toxicology report, so we don't know what really happened. And there's nothing that the ME saw that was anything physically, no physical injury, and the detectives, investigators saw no physical injury. So we have nothing on that. Could this have been a happenstance where something she ingested caused her death? Yes. Could it be something else? They'll determine and that's why the toxins have to come back first.
What typically, because I remember the initial autopsy came back inconclusive, and then after that, we've just been waiting for the final autopsy and the toxicology tests. In New York, how long does it typically take? Because if she died August 5th, August 4th, kind of the midnight hours around there, how long does it typically take to get that type of information?
It usually takes about several weeks or so. So, this is another thing. It's like, maybe this is something it doesn't come up immediately in that toxicology, the original toxicology, or the later on. So they're retesting. You want to make sure you do it right. And if you became inconclusive at that time, does that mean there was fentanyl in it? Because a lot of times we have overdoses, it kind of comes up. And there's something that we can see visibly at a crime scene, and that's what they are. These overdoses are crime scenes. We would see the product there. But apparently there was an hour difference in time between this text message that she sent and then her death, and then her possible death at this point, or she was going through whatever episode she was going through, and his helping, and he's trying to resuscitate her, and then she throws up on him. So if he's saying he threw up on her, that meant he was either that close to her when it happened, And that's things that come up in the interview. Did that happen? Did she throw up on you, or did you sit in the vomit that she was at? And that's the things you be very specific on. So, but to make it criminal at this point, you can't. And that's as much as people want to see something, reality is the law is the law is the law. We can only follow what the law allows. And if it's not a crime, there's nothing criminally we can do. There's nothing on the law enforcement side. Then it would have to go to civil suits and along those lines. But the reality is there's nothing right now to say conclusively that he did something to her that caused her death.
Because I still think, and again, it's one of those things where it's the line between like, that's just odd and suspicious, and is this a crime? And you go back to the naked part of it. Because for me, it's like, if she threw up on you and then she goes limp and she's on the floor unconscious, like to have the wherewithal to, it just seems odd to like take all of your clothes off, apparently. Like, it's not just like he took a sweatshirt off and ran out. I mean, he took them all off and then he's running, but he's also trying to get her help, which might explain why the 911 call wasn't made until a little, like, it just seems like it was a chaotic scene. I guess with that piece of information, if you are trying to go through and you're still waiting on the toxicology and the autopsy, I mean, I guess how do you approach that part of the story in an interview room with somebody where, no, it doesn't seem criminal, it's not illegal to do that, certainly in the context of this case, but at the same time, it's like, how much throw up was there that you were going to go full nude and then go running up and down a dock looking for help?
And that's the thing you have to look at too. That's where the questioning comes in. Going when you talk about you took a clothes up, what were you wearing at the time? So that conversation, then go back to the crime scene to see if it matches up to what he's telling you. Because apparently he had suntan lotion, he's spraying it around too. Very unusual actions to do. And again, that's out of the ordinary. And that's why I always get worried about the word suspicious, because when you say something suspicious, it becomes something else. It's A, B, or C. It's out of the ordinary for someone that is involved in someone getting sick or possibly vomiting, having whatever episode, running out, taking your clothes off. It is unusual, but that's why with the information that you have and the detail-oriented that you're looking at when you speak to this person, you're saying, yes, okay, now it makes sense. So you have to get the facts, the information they're telling you in the interview, and match it up with the physical evidence available.
And it seems like, I mean, he's, according to his lawyer, he's cooperating. You know, he's not facing charges at this point. But, I mean, you used to work narcotics. And I think of this story where it happens at the Montauk Yacht Club. I mean, this is like the Ritzy, playground of the rich and famous, you know, in the Hamptons in Long Island. She was this young, beautiful, up-and-coming fashion designer. Like, there's a lot of things that the media, you know, that grab the attention of people. You strip all that away, though. I guess how common does this scenario play out and that you come across if you're a narcotics detective?
It's a lot more common than you think. And that's the thing. The reality of this incident is it is a high profile, media sensitive incident where it's a beautiful woman who in Montauk, she's at the boat, she drops dead in a sense. Her benefactor is there, naked. All these things come into play, but it happens more often than not. And a lot of times they happen in batches. So I think as investigators and narcotics investigators, if you have one, you're going to have 2 or 3 overdoses. That seems to be how it pretty much runs through. So you're having guys look at prior cases of people who've overdosed. And then you try to develop a nexus between the ODs that you've had that have survived and the ones that haven't. So you really look at a lot of avenues when you talk about these type of cases. It used to be back in the day, it ended where the person died, and that was unfortunate because usually what happens is that person dies, the product is still out there. And not only that, when people hurt, and this is unfortunate with a lot of drug users, when they hear someone overdoses, they actually want to get that product because that means it's really good product.
Last question is, if someone is, and this is generally speaking, is it illegal to not give up the source of where you bought a substance if you are, you know, in a situation like this?
It's not illegal to not say anything, but that's the reason why a lot of times we have to go outside that person's interview, outside that conversation. So you really have to look at any communication they have. That means you talk to friends and family. And a lot of times the victims, you know, we have people overdose who survive and they're not cooperative, and that happens. But with this case, you know, her partner, her business partner, has been very cooperative. To what extent he knows about anything has been given up already. I don't know much more they're going to have. And eventually, sooner or later, his attorney may just have him stop conversing with the police. but you have to go the outside avenue. In other words, you're going to have to go through their phone records, anything along those lines, any prior contacts that they've had in the past, and go a little more background into any other history they have beside what you have as far as their business business partnership.
And we'll see what happens next in this story. Now 3 months, more than 3 months since Martha Nolan was found dead at the Montauk Yacht Club. Retired NYPD Detective David Sarney. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you much and stay safe.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.